Hello, I'm Syra Shakir, Associate Professor in Learning and Teaching here at Leeds Trinity University.
Hello, I'm Andi Brierley. I am the Head of Access, Participation and Outcomes, and I oversee the Access and Participation Plan here at Leeds Trinity University.
So we're basically here to talk a little bit about the work that we're doing, aren't we, Andy, in relation particularly to race equity. So I thought I'll just, maybe speak a little bit about what the co-creation work that I'm doing involves, how we're considering race equity in our curriculum, in our learning and teaching and assessment, and ultimately how it's impacting positively on student outcomes and student experience. We spent quite a bit of time, haven't we, talking about co-creation, Andy, and what that might mean in terms of the access and participation plan and outcomes for students ultimately. And really, the co-creation has been fundamental to breaking down those power dynamics that often exist between the educator and a student in a classroom. It's about really valuing student wisdom, student knowledge, their lived experience, which is so important, isn't it, Andy, in our work? Bringing those voices into the curriculum, into learning and teaching and assessment practice. The co-creation projects have been so great over the last few years, and the data, the rich data that has come from student voice that students have shared has just been phenomenal. We can learn so much from our students about our learning and teaching practice, how we can improve the curriculum, how we can improve assessments for students, and really ensuring that we are embedding race equity in these areas. I think for me, one of the really kind of eye-opening experiences over the last few years of co-creation and through all the research that students have led for students, by students, with me there, supporting them along the way, has really been about that lived experience and sharing stories and wisdom with other students coming through the system, and how we can use that as a really teaching tool and also a way of teaching other students. What's your thoughts about that, Andy?
So, as the Head of Access, Participation and Outcomes, I've obviously just recently gone through the process of writing our commitment to access and participation. And interestingly enough, I was at a conference last week where the Head of Fair Access for the Office of Students, which is the regulator for higher education, mentioned that there's been 20 years of mandatory spending on access and participation work, and yet here, as well as the wider sector, we still see these gaps, these awarding gaps between non-white students and white students comparatively. And I believe that co-creation is the central feature of a kind of wider approach. So what I mean by that is we've got to take a whole institution or a whole provider approach to addressing some of those gaps. So for example, like you outlined, reviewing how we do assessments, but also thinking about the curriculum, is it inclusive? And so we've got an approach to diversify the curriculum and to take a social justice approach to the curriculum. But the centerpiece of all of that whole provider approach has to come from the students that are experiencing it firsthand. So if we think about it as a systemic approach, I believe the work that you're doing, the work that I'm about to get involved in too, is the central focus. And I know that because I've only recently arrived at higher education, but my background is in youth justice, and we did a lot of, we call it participation as opposed to co-creation, but it's the same principles. Is that we knew if we want to improve services for justice-involved children, we had to shift policy and practice that empowered them to be able to tell us what we were doing well and what we were not doing so well, so that we could respond to that knowledge and expertise and that lived experience so that we can best meet their needs. For me, it's the only way really we can tackle the gaps, the disparity in outcomes, the disadvantages and the exclusion that BAME students, but other students too, but particularly in this conversation, students that are non-white, because I believe that the higher education institutions that we have been built off a history of privilege, of power, and we just need to redress that somehow. And I think co-creation is the way to be able to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And we almost need to fight that power, really, don't we, in a sense, and really try to dismantle that power hierarchy that often exists. I mean, a thing that's, well, lots of things really that have, you know, helped with my understanding of working so closely with students over the last few years through this co-created approach that is really rooted in anti-racist theory, critical race theory, uses this decolonized pedagogic interactive way of engaging with students from all different levels and all different backgrounds, through lived experience and through sharing their wisdom. It's really highlighted to me that the awarding gap is so complex. It's such a complex set of experiences that lead ultimately to the awarding gap, that not one thing will fix it, right? It's like multifaceted. It's almost like a battlefield, because you have to kind of come at it from all different sides and use all different kind of tactics and approaches to address this really wicked issue of the awarding gap, which we see is unfortunately affecting students of colour and students from Black, Asian, minority, ethnic or global majority backgrounds. So it is an issue of race, and it is an issue of racial inequality or racial inequity. So the work that we're doing, and obviously the work that you're evidencing through the Access and Participation Plan, and that we're doing through learning and teaching, I mean, it doesn't even just stop at the curriculum, does it? And for me, the curriculum kind of makes it sound like it is just learning and teaching. And that was initially my starting point and a lot of my focus in the work that I've been doing through co-creation. But what I'm understanding about this journey of disadvantage and that leads to the awarding gap is that there are so many different things that are going wrong, let's say, on the student journey that contributes to this awarding gap at the end. So the curriculum and learning and teaching approaches and assessment, they're just one part of that, you know? So decolonizing our curriculum or using co-creation as a pedagogic approach, for example, they are just one part of a whole number of different things. We need to be thinking about personal tutoring, don't we, Andy?
Yep.
And like that coaching approach, about mentoring, where students can share their lived experience with other people, role modeling and representation. So who do our students see at the university? Do they see people that look like them? Do they see people who they can relate to and who they can share that kind of understanding with? And then it's stuff around like what you might say pastoral care, our mental health and well-being services. You know, how diversity informed are they of students' background and individual experiences, and all the aspects of their identity? What does the campus look like? What are the buildings like in terms of accessibility and classrooms? How do we support those sort of peer friendships within the group and building those relationships and rapport and connections for students with other students? What is the role of students' union, for example, and student union societies in terms of building that belonging and bringing students together? How can they be involved? Then there's all the stuff around the cost of living crisis and financial hardship, you know, and students working part-time, mature students, students with caring responsibilities, students with other disadvantage before they've even got to university. So there's a whole host of different things, isn't there, going on, Andy, that all contribute to this student experience. And so you touched on this just earlier, how important it is that, you know, it's a whole university approach, isn't it? It's a whole institution approach, and we've all got a role and responsibility to play. And what I'd say is that, you know, we've all got some agency to affect change, and they could be small changes and something much larger, but we've all got a role and responsibility to affect some positive change for our students. What are your thoughts, Andy?
I just think you've kind of nailed it on the head there. I think if we all understand, and it's difficult because people have got workloads and people are busy, and you know that's the nature of being at work. But I think the bit about responsibility, I think if we recognise that we can all work together collectively to try to mitigate. I mean, you've just outlined a whole host of different reasons that may contribute towards certain students being disadvantaged, and that's difficult, and it is multifaceted. So the only response can be that we come at it collectively. Yeah. And that we work in solidarity, right, as a united front to tackle this issue. And that does mean having difficult conversations as well, doesn't it? Absolutely.
Individually, self-reflection in our teams, in our schools and our faculties, and thinking about our own positionality, right, and the power that we hold, and also thinking and questioning our own potential internal biases or prejudices, and that we need to be really open to understanding where that comes from and how we can move things on. And this is all the stuff that we're doing around anti-racist practice and sort of changing those hearts and minds and really thinking about how we can embed anti-racist practice, because it's just not enough, is it, to be not racist? You know, if we're going to tackle racial inequalities or racial inequity, whether it's through the awarding gap and so on and so forth, we're going to have to move to becoming anti-racist, and that means taking action, and that means, you know, getting over difficult issues that we might find difficult just to talk about, you know. So certainly there is a huge drive for people to become more accountable, to become advocates, to work in solidarity and really work together to solve this issue. It's hard work. It's hard work.
And you've been doing it a long time, and you've been doing a good job. And we continue to do it, and we will continue. We will push on. I think we're in a good place. I think one of the things that we haven't touched on is evaluation. I think we need to ensure that we're doing things and evaluating them, so we are learning as a sector what's effective and what's not effective. And I think that sets us in a good direction to hopefully challenge some of these things that we're talking about. Yeah,
absolutely right there. Yeah, evaluation, scrutiny, reviewing, continuous review of actions. Yeah, and then sharing what works. Sharing what works. Yeah.
And just bringing that sense of community and making sure that everybody feels supported, from the exec team right down to the staffing members. And I'm sure we'll make progress over the coming years.
Yeah. Thanks, Andy. It's been great speaking to you.
Thank you.
Hope you've enjoyed our short video today. And do get in touch with us if you want to at Leeds Trinity University. We're both based in the Office for Institutional Equity. Thank you.